Okay, good morning, everybody. Let me get this branding off of my thing here. Can't get these things to just stay off. There we go. That's better. Get the comments back on. Okay, well, thank you for joining me. I wanted to speak a little bit today about whether Canon feels okay or not. And this is obviously in regards to the latest Canon rumors, and we're going to talk about what I think is going to be happening going forward also. But to start this story about whether Canon feels all right or not, I want to take us back to 2017, 2018, and that is when Canon decided to enter the mirrorless segment with the EOS R. Now, along with the EOS R were several very nice RF lenses that were brand new at the time. And what's strange about this is the EOS R, by any measure, was a very lackluster camera. It didn't really do that well. It was a 5D Mark IV sensor, yet it only had one card slot. It had this weird touch bar thing on the top of it that thankfully Canon jettisoned, afterwards. Is my audio okay? My audio levels are going a bit crazy here, so I think it's okay. Okay, well, I'm just going to keep on going then. If my audio isn't okay, let me know, or let me know if my audio is okay, because my meter looks like it's doing something strange here. So anyway, going along with the EOS R, it was a strange camera. Only one card slot, weird touch bar, had a massive crop in, I believe, any 4K mode, going all the way to like 1.7 times or something like that in 4K. And that was very strange. And it just wasn't a very good camera. However, along with the EOS R, they unveiled the 28-70 f2 RF, which is still, I have a copy of that, I think one of the overall best lenses, especially still lenses, ever created. And so if that wasn't a clue to the Canon roadmap at the time, even though the EOS R was lackluster, this big 28-70 f2 lens, along with some of the other ones like the 51.2, which is, it's okay. I have one of those too. It's okay. It's not great. It's noisy, it's slow, but it's okay. It's sharp, it's got a nice image. So that was a clue to the roadmap. Now, all along the line, okay, Sony is obviously their biggest competition. And right around the same time that the EOS R came out, Sony released the A7 III. A7 III is a better camera than the EOS R in pretty much every measure. It really is. The only thing I remember the EOS R had over the A7 III is that you can, by way of HDMI, get 422 8-bit, I believe it was, instead of 420 8-bit in video recording. So other than that, the A7 III, it's got better focusing system. It has dual card slots, full frame. It was only $2,000, and that was a big deal at the time. I think the EOS R was a little bit more money than that when it first came out. And so it really put Sony on that map. Now, along with the A7 III, they started developing some very nice native glass, like the 16 to 35 G Master. Okay, so that's setting the stage for whether Canon feels okay or not, because the next significant camera that Canon released was the R5. And to this day, in 2023, the R5 is still a camera to be reckoned with, even compared to the Sony A7R5 that came out, some of the Fuji cameras that have come out, the Nikon Z series cameras that have come out. The R5 is about, what, a 3-year-old camera or so now. A little bit of a rough start, with the heat thing, but I think that was mostly a marketing misstep from Canon because, see, they marketed this camera as an 8K camera, and then when it came to fruition, it turned out that the camera wasn't very good at recording 8K because you only had however many minutes of it, and then you had to wait for the thing to cool down for an hour, right? So, but they fixed that. They fixed that with the 1.6 firmware going forward, and the R5 has been a perennial bestseller for Canon pretty much ever since it's come out. In fact, it's sometimes difficult to find stock places that on the R5 today. So now let's get into what's been happening over the past year or so. Okay, Sony, well, the past 2 years, Sony came out with the Alpha 1, which still to this day is probably the most mind-bending camera that has ever been created. And it's a 2-year-old camera now. And it still does some things better than other flagship cameras, better than the Nikon Z9 and better than the Canon R3, which we'll get to. Then Nikon released the Z9, okay, which is a camera that almost does everything as well as the A1. It's a bit strange that they decided to go to only an electronic shutter on the thing because the sensor read speed is not fast enough to give a very fast flash sync on the Z9. That's its one Achilles heel for like the work that I do. For instance, as I enjoy the A1's 1/400th of a second maximum flash sync, the Z9 doesn't do that. One of the big reasons the Z9 doesn't do that is because it has no shutter. So you're limited to the read speed of the sensor. The Canon R3 came out just after the A1, not too long after the A1. And here's my theory about that, okay? And this is why I think the rumors that are coming out from Canon over the past day or two, the R5 doesn't have a lot of significance with this rumor mill. I think the R1, if we ever see the R1, doesn't have a whole lot of significance right now either. What I do think has significance is the R3. Okay, the R3 is the strangest camera in Canon's lineup. And here's what I think happened is the A1, Sony beat the Canon to the punch when they released the A1. It does, like I said, all these mind-bending things, and it really does. Canon, knowing that the R3 is a lesser camera to the A1 in most measures, decided, yeah, you know what? We're going to call this thing 3. We're not going to call it 1 because we're going to make sure 1 is the best out there. So back to the drawing board they go. The problem then becomes you've got Sony with their flagship camera. You have Nikon, who is in a distant third to Sony and Canon, who now have their camera out there, the Z9. I believe the R3 was going to be the R1. But Canon went back to the drawing board, and now we still don't have an R1 because the A1 pretty much just walked right all over the R3. So let's take a look at the R3, and then we'll get to the rumors, the Canon rumors. It's good to see a few of you joining me here. Somebody let me know in the comments if you would, if my audio sounds okay, because I see my meter kind of doing this, and I hope my audio is not doing this like my meter is doing. So it's always a technical part of technical wizardry doing all these things and having everything talk to each other. So somebody please tell me in the comments if my audio is okay. I digress. So the R3 is the strangest Canon camera. I think all the rumors kind of center around the R3 right now, not necessarily because of what the competition is doing, but because Canon does not have a flagship camera. Now, what's interesting is sound is good. Hey, Jaroslav Bengal. Good to see you, dude. Where are you coming from? So I keep getting off track here. So okay, so the R3, let's pick out its faults, why it's not a flagship. Okay, first off, because the flagship in the sense of the Sony and of the Canon is a camera that is over 40 megapixel. And I do truly believe that in today's day and age, okay, drive space, drive capacity is no longer of concern. As far as editing goes, like editing composites like I do, is no longer a concern. Switzerland, hey, thanks for joining me all the way from Switzerland. Let's bring you up here. And so why would Canon have the flagship be a 24 megapixel camera? And furthermore, why am I calling it a 24 megapixel camera? Or why am I calling it a flagship? Because that's actually from Canon themselves. And so Simon, the ordinary filmmaker, recently read an interview in French. He's Canadian, so I guess he knows French. I think a lot of them do. That the Canon engineer said that the R3 is their current flagship. So let's see, Leo. Hey, good to see you, bud. Leo from Germany. One of my guys who is often participating in this. So we're talking about how the R3 is strange. It's not a flagship. The R1's a flagship, okay? But the problem now is that obviously that the A1 and that the Nikon Z9 have been out for a couple of years, and Canon does not have an answer for those. There's rumors that are not very good about what the R1 may or may not be, but so the R3 has lesser of a megapixel, and here's a big one for me. The R3 does not have symmetrical media. Okay, the R3 has a CF Express type B card, which is great, but then it has an SD card, which means the biggest, nastiest codecs that you can get out of the R3, and it's rad. I mean, the thing does 6K RAW, which actually doesn't take as much processing power, but it creates a lot of data that you have to dump. You cannot redundantly record that. That is not a flagship camera in the modern sense of the term in 2023. It is important that you can redundantly record. And I tell people all the time, especially in the case of SD cards, which are the most problematic, least robust type of media that you can currently put in a camera. If you have not had an SD card fail, it is just because you have not shot enough yet on an SD card. I've had 2 SD cards fail. I've had a Sony Tough card fail, and I've had a Lexar card fail, SD cards. And you know what? Only because I was redundantly recording at the time. I think that was both in a Sony A7R4 body, I want to say. Only because I was redundantly recording at the time was I able to not lose work that I'd done. So redundantly recording that is a thing that a flagship camera needs to have. It's not tough to do in 2023. Figure it out, right? So now we have looks like I got a couple more of you joining me. Michael from Switzerland. How you doing, Michael? Glad to see you. So now we have the Canon rumor that just came out a couple days ago that says, okay, we are not getting an R5 Mark II in 2023, but it is going to be in 2024, along with the alleged R1. I have a big problem with this. Okay, I have a big problem with this because the R5 is due to have a Mark II replacement coming. Isaac, what's up? Where are you coming from, Isaac? I think I recognize you. You've been on the streams before. Um, Canon has released a new version of the R6, the R6 Mark II. Okay, which is really pretty similar to the R5, albeit a lesser resolution. New Hampshire, Isaac. Okay, so it is. What is it? It's about 1 in the afternoon in New Hampshire. Is it cold there? Y'all been having storms, right? We have too in California here. But New Hampshire, I think, is cold all the time anyway, isn't it? So it's important that they bring out a new R5, if for no other reason because the R6 Mark II has better thermal architecture on board, which means you don't need a firmware update to be able to throttle the problems that the R5 had with problematic heat with the recording modes. And the other part of this is strangely the R5C, which I have one of. I had an R5 at the same time that I had the R5C, and the R5C has a better image than the R5. And what's odd about this is when the R5C was first released, everybody was saying, probably correctly, that it is the same sensor as the R5. However, whatever sorcery they're doing inside the R5C is making it a better image than in the R5. And so when an R5 is to be redesigned into the R5 Mark II, I'm sure that's going to be incorporated. I'm sure the thermal architecture of the R6 Mark II is going to be incorporated. And you know what? Canon sells just a bazillion R5s. And so I know that if they do make a new version of the R5, the R5 Mark II, it is going to sell well also. Now let's take a look at the R1, okay? Because the R1 is Canon's upcoming flagship, and it's not the R3, for all the reasons that we went over. But what that's done is it's left a 2-year hole in Canon's lineup versus the competition, Sony, who has their A1, Nikon, who has their Z9. They need a flagship. They need to bring this to market. Why would Canon, if we are to take the rumor that happened just yesterday, why would they release both a redesign of an R5 and an R1 right around the same time as each other? And that is around next year, right? 2024, if the rumors are to be believed. That would seem like not a very good idea. It would seem like the better idea would be to release the R5 Mark II, let that all the hype go, and then when one of your competitors tries to come out with the Sony A whatever, right, or the Nikon Z whatever, then haha, look, R1 on the horizon. I mean, that would seem like a good plan. It doesn't pencil out to me that they would wait until they're going to release the R1, which everybody thinks will be in time for the Olympics next year, which would make sense. To release the R5 Mark II. That doesn't make sense to me. So I still think we're going to get the R5 Mark II, at least an announcement of this year. I don't care what the latest Canon rumor says. I understand well enough the timeline that all of these cameras have been, working within, and the competition has been working within, to think that that makes the most sense. So let's go to the comments here, see what you guys think makes the most sense. All right, Michael, current flagship. Yeah, the current flagship. So it's funny in this interview, they talked about how the 1DX Mark III, which is their latest and probably last SLR camera, DSLR, is the current flagship along with the R3, I think is how they said it. R3 is a flagship because it's got, it tracks your eyeballs. You look in the viewfinder, whatever, I don't see, I just named a few pretty good reasons why it couldn't be the flagship. Um, I think it's a warm up to whatever the flagship is going to be. The R3's got a fantastic body, and for those of you who have never like held or used an R3, it's light. Like it's a lot lighter than you thought. Even with the battery, it's a lot lighter than you thought it was going to be, and it just seems like it's one piece of like the body is one piece. It's not like the A1 here, right? Where you've got the battery grip that's separate from the body. So it's a nice camera. Okay, Michael, hi from Switzerland. Hi, Michael from California. Isaac, what's up? And Isaac is coming to us from New Hampshire. Michael, I'm assuming the Canon will have the Digic 11 in the R1 and R5 Mark II. I don't know what they're going to call it, but what's interesting about this is I saw something pretty recently about how the Digic processors, like the Digic 10 that they put in everything, is actually the implementation of it is actually different in different bodies. And so the R6 Mark II, for instance, the Digic 10 processor in it is different than the Digic 10 processor in the R3. And I'm not sure which one is superior because the R6 Mark II is a newer camera, but a lesser camera, right, than the R3. So yeah, I think it goes without saying that they're going to have a new processor. I'd be interested to know if they are going to go kind of the route that Sony has in the A7R5, and that is bringing separate processors on board to do so. The Sony has the one that does just the auto, the bug lizard focus or whatever it does. It creates stick people and whatever it does. So, but they have a separate processor for that in the A7R5, and it'd be interesting to see if that kind of continues. And it makes sense. I mean, computers have worked like this forever. You've got dedicated video memory that's on a separate hardware device than is the processor for the rest of your system. So, we'll see, but I agree. I think it's going to have a new processor of some sort. Isaac just got back from the grossest property I've taken photos of: mounds of clothes, dirt, cobwebs. Yeah, 34 degrees, very cold. I tell you that I'm like you, I'm like a lot of us real estate photographers. I shoot them all, right? So I did a $3.5 million property last week on one day, and then went and did a mobile home on the next day, right? I don't mind, and yeah, I've seen some bad ones. I don't mind the ones that are really dirty. The thing that really gets me is fleas. If they have fleas, I've run into fleas a few times where, when I'm walking, they're all over my socks and biting my legs. It's just nasty. So the piles of clothes and stuff, I see that more often than I should. You would think that people trying to sell their home would have it better kept. When renters are in there, sometimes it's like, hey, this guy's going to let us have access for an hour on this day because the landlord's selling the place. Poor guy who rents it, he just has to find somewhere to stay, but they usually don't care. There's going to be crap all over the place, with renters. But yeah, 34 degrees. Better you than me, bud. Michael, Digic 11 could solve the majority of heat problems that the Digic 10 is based on old ARM A9 technology from 2007. That's interesting. You think so? Maybe because it's more, yeah, I could see it. Maybe because it's more efficient. Um, Probably because it's more efficient. And that brings up another thing too, is Canon really, I think, needs to get rid of the LPE6 battery architecture. It's not that good. It's not that good in any form that it is. And if you combine that with the point that you just made, um, about the efficiency of the processor, these processors draw too much power, and everything about a Canon camera draws more power than, say, like a Sony camera. right? And I have had, you know, several of each in their modern iterations, Canon and Sony cameras. And the Sony cameras are just more efficient at their power draw. And not only are they more efficient at their power draw, but the Z batteries are just better batteries than the LPE6s are. Even in the current LPE6 NH form, you know, it's better now than were the legacy LPE6s or the LPE6s that are the knockoff third-party ones that you get with so many widgets nowadays. But they really do. They need a better thermal architecture, and I think you're absolutely right that that starts with the processor. But they need to jettison that battery, you know, and I get it. You know, I get that you want to design products around things that your customer base already owns. I can think of no better example of this, no better, more egregious example of this than Apple's Lightning connection. Because right after the Lightning connection came out in like 2014, 2015 or so, they co-developed Thunderbolt, you know, with Intel. And Thunderbolt with the USB-C connection is just such a better thing than Lightning is in all kinds of ways. But what happened is, you know, Apple for a couple years was building devices with the Lightning connection, and they weren't going to walk that back because now all the cables, some of the charging bricks, you know, I mean, their whole ecosystem, because we all know that Apple's big on ecosystem, was built around this Lightning connection. And so even though the USB-C implementation of Thunderbolt is better in every way, they hang on to Lightning. They continue to hang on to Lightning. You know, and I wouldn't be, you know, getting off track here, but I wouldn't be surprised to see Apple actually go completely portless on their phones before they get rid of Lightning, which sucks. But you know, and I think Canon is a lot of the same way with the LPE6 battery. They've It's a legacy battery, uh, and even though they fit the legacy ones, they lack performance compared to the NH form of it. And in the case of the R5C, now this is what's interesting with the R5C. With the R5C, it knows what kind of battery you put in it. And if you put a a knockoff like a Watson or a, you know, one of these other ones, LP, one of the ones that you get with widgets, right? So like I've got like motorized sliders that came with LPE6s that aren't Canon LPE6s, they're whatever they are. The camera will first ask you, it'll say, this is a non-factory battery. Would you like to continue? Yes, I would like to continue. You know, thank you. But then what it'll do is not only will it have diminished life, but the R5C will not charge the battery when you plug the camera into USB-C. You know, you turn the camera off, plug it into USB, and that's how I charge all my. I don't use battery chargers, right? Because I can turn the camera off and plug it into USB-C from whatever other power source, and it's going to work. But with a non-factory, non-first-party LPE6 battery, it will actually not charge the battery either. I don't know. Maybe because it's, you know, because it's, I have no idea. So how did we get off on that? Digic 7, 2016, Digic 8, 2018, 10, 2020. Our A6 based on ARM Cortex A9, as I understand it, Digic 10 is in fact dual Digic 8. I don't know. You seem to know more about that than I do, Michael. You know, during those years, I wasn't paying a huge amount of attention to the Canon cameras during those years because I was heavily invested in Sony during that time, and I still am. But now I've kind of, you know, muddied the waters by by heavily investing in Canon too. You know, so the camera I'm shooting this on now is a C200. I've got a pair of those. I have an R5C. I've got probably a dozen lenses between EF and RF mount now. So I don't know what years were the different processors. I will say this about the Digic processors versus the Sony implementations of the processor, though. One thing that the Canon cameras are better than the Sony cameras at. Every Canon camera that I've tried versus every Sony camera that I've tried is the boot time. The boot time is a lot faster on Canon cameras. Like the R5C, you flick the photo mode on and boom, it's on. Even the Alpha 1, okay, here, I'll show you. Alpha 1, if you go on, there it is, right? And this is Sony's absolute flagship. Now, keep in mind that that's a first world problem. That's not like what computers used to be, where you start the thing and you go make a cup of coffee and this and that. So let me talk really quick though, because we're talking about the Canon rumors and what Canon is or is not going to be able to do. And there's Jaroslav saying you have to leave. Well, it's good having you. Thank you, sir. Come again. Let me go back to you, Michael, here. Why is the Sony Alpha 1 so insane? I'll give you the number one reason that I point out that maybe people don't think about why the Sony Alpha 1 is so insane. Because at some point, right, every large manufacturing company, Sony, Canon, everybody has certain margins that they need to meet. Certain margins you need to meet. They need to keep the shareholders, appeased and all that. They also do research, right? I mean, how much are people reasonably going to pay for all of these cameras? Now, sometime during that research, Sony said, okay, it can do all these mind-bending things, and it really does, but there is zero chance that we can charge a penny more than $6,500 for this camera. That is already a crazy amount of money for a camera. We know it. But what do we cut? Because right now we're sitting on a $7,000 camera, a $6,800 camera. What do we cut in order to hit that price point? And you know what they cut in order to hit that price point? This back screen. Let's see if this is showing. This crap back screen on the A1. And why do I know that was the case? Well, a couple of reasons. One is there is a better back screen on the A7S3, which I also have one of. There is also better back screens, and they were coming out with these cameras at the same time that they were coming out with the A1. I think it might have actually been the same announcement event. They reworked the A7R3 and the A7R4 to have better back screens on them. So why would they put this crap like $1 million? I mean, it's a bad screen. You can't see. You don't want to gauge anything critical by it. That's one of the reasons that I'll wirelessly tether to an iPad all the time now using the A1. Why would they put that crap screen on the back? The only reason that would be only reason is to hit a price point, which means everything else in the A1 is worth you're shelling out for it. That to me, and this is what I point out to people, is one of the really powerful reasons that the A1 is so legit, because it has that crap screen on the back. They couldn't charge a penny over $6,500, and they had to get rid of something. They're not going to get rid of the stacked 50 megapixel sensor. They're not going to get rid of the dual CFXA card architecture. They're not going to get rid of the way that it calculates white balance. It allegedly has some other white balance sensor that it calculates white balance. And they're not going to get rid of any of that stuff. They're not going to get rid of the speed of the camera. And it really is fast. I mean, if you plug the thing in USB-C to dump files like that, over a Thunderbolt connection, I'm getting more than 400 megabytes a second transfer speed out of the internal storage in the camera. It is a monster. I've never had anything near that speed in any other camera, just plugged into a USB-C port. So what does Canon need to have? Let's talk about this. What does Canon need to have with an R5 Mark II? Which again, I think, for those of you just joining, I see there's a few more on here. We're talking about the Canon R5 Mark II rumor and the Canon R1 rumor that recently came out over Canon rumors, and I don't believe them. Well, I mean, okay. Here's the other thing: I don't believe any of the Canon R5 Mark II rumors that we've ever heard to this point. The first set of specs that they were, which was late last year, um, it was basically a Sony A7R5 camera with a Canon badge on it. 61 megapixel was one of the rumored specs. It's like, okay, look, you need about 45 megapixel to do 8K. So we know that spec is not because of video. 61 is a strange number to just land on arbitrarily unless they're talking about that actual Sony sensor. And we know that that's not the case because Canon is one of the few companies that makes their own sensors and doesn't buy them from Sony. So that already, since that is the headline of the specs of the R5 Mark II, I already don't believe that whole rest of the string of specs. I just don't believe it, because the main one is off, right? So now we have the same website, might be the same source reporting. I have no idea because I don't know their sources, saying that, well, we're not going to get the R5 Mark II. We're going to get it next year along with the R1. I don't think there's any way in heck that Canon is dumb enough to do that. I don't know though. They've made some pretty dumb decisions of late, steering the ship. So let's see, Leo. I think Canon is always behind the competition with its innovations. What more or less forces Canon to improve again and again, and therefore postpone the announcements again and again. I'm not really sure that Canon wants to compete. And by that, I mean, of course, you have competitors, in any space, right? I mean, when you have competing companies, of course, there's competition for sales and market share and all that. But I don't think Canon wants to compete in the same way, going back to Apple, that Apple doesn't want to compete. Apple is such a heritage brand now and has always been known to do things their own way. Even the way that OS X is outlaid forces you to do things Apple's way, not, and that's why I like Windows. By the way, I do use iPhones, but that's why I like Windows, because Windows allows me to do things my way, more than Apple's operating system. And I've given it some good, true shots too for months at a time, and it's just not for me. I think Canon's the same way. Canon dumped the third-party lens support, which was absolutely within their rights to do, but maybe a little tone deaf, right? For the photographers that are less affluent that are coming up. And why would they do that? Because they don't really care about competing. They want to build the best machines that they can build, regardless of what the competition is doing. And there's nothing wrong with that, as long as people are buying them. And sales seem to be brisk. So, but I agree, Leo. I think that they are always behind. And the other part of that is, the cripple hammer thing is real with Canon cameras, right? I mean, let's nobody, jive anybody on that. Like the cripple hammer thing is real. My C200 that I'm shooting on right now doesn't have a 10-bit codec. It has a raw 12-bit raw, which is gorgeous, and then it has an 8-bit, which is not. Why doesn't it have a 10-bit codec if it has an 8-bit codec? And that's compressing even more, so it takes even more horsepower, right, to compress that than to, well, it's because the C300 had 10-bit, so they wouldn't do it. Okay, now, if you take Sony, is the opposite end of the spectrum. The $6,500 A1 doesn't do some things that the $2,500 A7 IV does. And why is that? Well, it's because the A7 IV is a newer product. So they had the ability to do these things. They had it worked out by the time the A7 IV came out. And so they put it in the A7 IV. Pisses off everybody that bought an A1 who now thinks they ought to have these capabilities, but that's a whole other thing that I'm not going to get into right now. I might actually make a video about all that. Those two examples though, with the Canon C series cinema cameras and Sony A1 and A7, those are very good practical examples of that behavior though. Of the way that Sony just kind of ends up throwing everything in the kitchen sink into whatever newer body they have, regardless of what above that body they may cannibalize. FX6 and FX9 is a great example of that, right? FX6 is a better camera than the FX9 in every measure, except maybe some of the more esoteric broadcast things that the FX9 does. But FX6 is a better camera. It's almost half the price. Why? Because it's newer, and they could do it then, and they could still hit their price point, and they could still sell them, and keep their shareholders happy. So they did. Canon just does not do that. Canon is just, hey, if you want this feature, well, we have a product for that, and you got to pay twice as much to get that. Even though we could have done it, we're not going to do it because we're going to take sales away from that. So, I know that was kind of an $11 answer there. Michael, I wonder how many of the bomb cuts happen close to release. I know you're talking about the screen. I know I've kind of wondered that in my mind too. That's definitely stated like a manufacturing guy. I've been in manufacturing before, so I'm kind of familiar with that world too. Um, so yeah, so bill of material, that's basically, for those of you who don't know, that's the collection of all the parts, all the made parts, all the sourced parts, everything that goes into making a product is the bill of material. So what Michael is talking about is, these are things that you rightly make decisions about pretty early on because of logistics of getting all of these things together into a process, and having them move through the process. It's not something that you typically make changes to late in the game unless there's a problem. So I don't know if that could have been a late made change due to pricing. I mean, I guess it could have been, depending on where currencies were moving, but that's a good point to bring up. Or did the engineers design a dream camera and then project managers went at the bomb with an axe? That could be too, because that's the other thing that happens is you've got upper management saying, you guys are crazy. Uh, you know, and engineers, I mean, they always want to build the best one of whatever, right? And that's their job, is we're going to design this dream camera, and then, the bean counters are going to come in and tell us why we can't do it. So that might be the case, but I think something did happen with that screen, and again, the only reason that I think that is because that is such an important product, for prestige of the brand, right? It's kind of like the race on Sunday, sell on Monday mentality, right? With NASCAR, when they got started, and they were actually racing road cars. Now, if you went to Dodge and you got a Plymouth, whatever it was, at the Dodge dealership, it was not the Superbird that you saw going around Talladega at a million miles an hour, but you saw that Superbird going around Talladega at a million miles an hour. That makes you want to buy a Dodge, right? So I think the same thing is true with A1. It's an important camera in that it is a showcase of Sony's stills technology. And so if you see what the A1 can do, and you see all the wild stuff that it can do, you know what? I can't afford an A1, but the A7 IV, I can afford one of those, and so they will sell A7 IVs off of what the A1 can do. For that reason, it needs to be squared away, right? And if they could not hit their margins because we can't charge a penny more than $6,500 for this thing, nobody's going to buy it. I think that crap back screen, and it really is a crap screen, that's what they axed, because that's the thing that makes zero difference as far as what the images coming out of the camera are going to be. Because let's face it, even the good ones, even the good screens Sony has are not really that great. Which is funny because this is the company that makes like, you know, mastering monitors that are like tens of thousands of dollars. Like we know they can do it. It's like why they don't do it, I have no idea. Right. But yeah, so we'll see what the R5 Mark II has. So if I were to make predictions, right, about what the R5 Mark II is going to have, I think 45. I don't think it's going to have more than a 45 megapixel sensor. I don't think that's a very 40 to 50 megapixels, I think, is a real sweet spot in today's world. And that's another reason why I don't think the R3 is obviously a flagship camera, because it doesn't have that. It doesn't make sense to have under about 35 megapixels now, especially not on a flagship, unless you're talking about a video-centric camera that is shooting RAW, and you do not want to window in on the sensor that much. So, if you have a video-centric camera that your goal is to shoot 6K, you need about 20 megapixels to shoot 6K. And that is, by the way, why the R3 shoots full frame 6K, because it's a 24 megapixel camera and it can use those 24 megapixels or 21 or whatever it is to shoot 6K. That's the only reason that would matter. Now, would Canon triple the resolution of a flagship like the R3 because they want to shoot 6K video? No, I don't think they would. And I think another important point to this is the R3 is a stills camera. The R3 has amazing video specs. The A1 shoots 8K. I don't know anybody who shoots A1 on 8K, but it can do it. And why can it do it? Because the Canon R5 can. Canon R5 came out before the A1. So I was like, okay, let's unlock this 8K thing. But the thermals are better on the Sonys too. So, you know, but I digress. The only reason you would, with a stills camera these days, dip below 30 megapixel, I think, is for video accommodations. Even noise performance, that doesn't matter much anymore. The A1's 50 megapixel, it's pretty clean. The A7R4 at 61 megapixels, it was noisy when I was using it for a couple of years, but allegedly the new A7R5 with its newer engine takes care of that. So what is the R5 Mark II going to have? I believe it is going to have the same or similar 45 megapixel sensor. I think that's a good sensor. I would love to see it be, well, I take that back. I think it needs to have either a BSI or a stacked sensor. There are advantages to both. I think they'll probably go BSI before they'll go stacked. However, I don't know. The R3 is stacked, and so maybe a larger megapixel stacked sensor. However, this is Canon with the cripple hammer thing, and so would that be cannibalizing the R3? I don't know, man. See, that's kind of the wild card with Canon. Is do they cannibalize something that they say is a higher end camera in the R3 by giving an R5 Mark II a stacked sensor that's more resolution? Why would anybody buy an R3 at that point, right? So I don't know, but we've been on it for about 50 minutes, and my viewers keep dropping here. So thanks for the comments. Thanks for the conversation. Let me know. I mean, what would you want in an R5 Mark II? Do you think the R5 Mark II is going to come out before the R1? I do. I don't. It doesn't make sense for Canon to run those two products into each other. So thanks always for participating, Leo. And Isaac, good to have you on board. Thanks for sorry about your dirty laundry real estate shoot there. And I will see you guys soon. Peace.